the earlier we are, for example, if you're in the middle position, or another gun +2, one other gun +2, the less we 3-bet. You have to take into account that there is a decently high 4-bet likelihood. So every single time we are in the middle position and under the gun open race and we consider 3-betting, and this guy has a fairly large or fairly high folded 3-bet, you have to consider that there are 4, 5, or 6 players left to act who can wake up with a hand. And that can happen 3, 4, 5% of the time for every single player. It also depends on the stack size. A guy with 20 big blinds, he's probably just 4-bet jamming his ace queen. So he's gonna 4-bet on you 5% of the time. Whereas the guy in the small with 100 bigs, he might let go of ace queen off. So let's say around 3 to 5%. So times 5. So between 20 and 25% of the time, we're gonna be in a dicey situation. And obviously if you're bluffing, we have to fold. So you cannot 3-bet that much from MP or under the gun against another gun that much, because there are still players left to act who can wake up with the hand. Same should be here. In-game awareness, you want to take a look who's sitting behind. If they're very, very aggressive fish sitting behind, you basically don't want to 3-bet bluff that much anyway, because they overcall you with hands like Jack-9 suited, Ace-9 suited, and those hands, they have pretty much not, but decently high equity against your bluffs. And then you're out of position with a shit hand against the maniac. No? So the more aggressive, especially when there are 2 or 3 spew-tards sitting behind, or 1 big spew-tard behind, just play a more straightforward style at that table anyway, and don't go too crazy. Yeah, and here's some rough guidelines. If someone is opening more than 55% from the button, you should adjust and 3-bet more. I'm going to give you a range for the button later, what you should 3-bet from small blind, big blind against the button. And this is basically what you can play against every single opponent. But if this guy, or if there's a guy who's opening more than 50% of the time his button, you can go looser and add more hands in your bluffing range. Cutoff higher than 32%, MP more than 25%. Isolation versus a fish with a semi-strong hand. Since we have such a huge edge against the fish, it's totally reasonable to go very thin for value and isolate him. Because first of all, he's gonna call with way more shittier hands against your 3-bet. What does it mean? That means that we basically have more raw equity, the equity which I have been showing you earlier, in a 3-bet pot against a fish. He might open raise a hand like 10-7 suited, 6-5 suited, 6-4 suited, King-8 suited from middle position. And when we 3-bet from the hijack, with a hand like King-Jack, King-10 suited, or even a suited ace, we have just way more equity. We're gonna be ahead very, very often. Compared to the situation playing against regular, he's probably ahead against our range once he calls our 3-bet. But against the fish, especially if he is opening many hands, you want to go thinner for value and 3-bet linear, or you might know the term merged. That means that we don't really have pure bluffs like 7-6 suited, 7-8 suited, or 6-4 suited. No, we're 3-betting hands like King-Jack, King-Queen suited. So basically in that region here, so here, those kind of hands. So the very top of our range, like something like Queen-Jack, King-Jack suited, or King-Queen off, which we normally would have flat called against regulars. But for isolation against the fish, in order to play heads up against him, we 3-bet thinner for value. And also you want to 3-bet more hands when your opponent is open raising bigger. You get worse odds to flat call. So we want to overtake the initiative more often, especially from the small blind. Against the min raise, you get great odds, so you can flat call a ton of hands. But against bigger open raising sizing, especially 2.5 and bigger, and especially against the 3x, you want to 3-bet more often. Here also more often means if you have those hands where you're not sure whether to flat, I mean sometimes or very often we have those no-brainer flats with King-Jack suited, Jack-10 suited. But if you have a hand like Queen-9 suited, cut off against MP, and you're not really sure, or Queen-10 suited, this guy is opening more on the larger side, you're not really sure, okay, what do I do with this hand here? And go for the 3-bet. as long as he's not a super nit, and once he 3x's his the big blind as an open raise, that he's having a very strong hand, then just overfold. Against nits, you want to play speculative hands like pocket pairs in order to suck out their over pairs and make sets or strong pseudo connector hands, but you shouldn't go too crazy against nits. Yeah, and no targets sitting behind. So if there are only regulars sitting behind who are capable of squeezing light, you want to also start 3-betting more. Same should be here if you have those kind of borderline hands or hands where you're not sure. Again, in poker, especially when it comes to 3-betting flatting, both options very often have relatively same value, and then you want to consider more information like who's sitting behind, what is his open raise sizing, is he tied, is he a nit, and then considering those information will lead you to a proper decision. And if you're still not sure at the end, okay, then it is how it is, and I accept it. Sometimes, even though we consider all information, don't confuse yourself. It is how it is. You consider, or you took all important and all given information into account, yet you're not able to make a decisive conclusion. Yeah, then it is how it is. And then flip a coin and then whatever. Okay, let's talk about 3-bet sizings real quick. You can see it here right away. You can pause and you can note it. I'm not going so much deeper into it. You can execute several 3-bet sizings, more than 50 bigs, 3x, or also 3.2x. You shouldn't go too small, especially important is that you out of position, you make it fairly large. And also a rule of thumb here, if there's one additional flat caller, you put one additional big blind on top. So if your usual 3-bet sizing is 3.5x out of position, and there's one additional caller, you 3-bet 4.5x, as easy as that. And then the shorter we get, we can decrease the sizing a little bit because the stack to pot ratio gets smaller. Squeezing. A hand that is strong enough to squeeze as a bluff, you should usually call on low and mid stakes. You don't need to go crazy and bluff a ton. Especially if you're new, if you're a beginner, if you're a little bit more advanced or experienced in tournaments, you might know the good squeezing spots as a bluff, and then you can take my advices and implement them in your game and find more spots where you can squeeze as a bluff. I mean, those spots where we squeeze for value, they are pretty obvious. I'm not going to teach you when to squeeze with aces or kings or queens. You should know that. We are squeezing a lot from the small blind, especially against middle position or middle/late position open and a late position flat call. So for example, the hijack opens and then the cutoff or the button flat calls here from the small blind, also from the big blind, are really good situations where we can squeeze a lot. It has to be given that villain has a high raise first in. Remember the numbers I have been giving you earlier. You can also orientate on those ranges which I have constructed for you. So if our under the gun range is 12, 13, 14%, then there's someone who's opening 18, 19%. He's more on the loser side, or even more than 20% from under the gun. And then there's a flat caller. You can loosen up and you can squeeze more. Avoid bluff squeezing against the fish when being out of position. So let's say you have a hand like ace-2 suited in the small blind, and there's an open raiser and the fish flat calls, or the fish open raises. We just call. I mean, we have such a strong hand. We have a very, very weak opponent involved, and we're going to play post-flop with a pretty decent hand multi-way, and yeah, there's no need to push the variance unnecessarily. Squeeze those hands that are either too weak to call, or not either, that are too weak to call but still have reasonable equity against villain's calling range. Here, this is a little bit more advanced. What does it mean? So for example, if under the gun opens and MP flat calls, I don't want to squeeze a hand like Jack 10 suited or 10-9 suited from the small blind or button. Why? Because MP's flatting range, if he flats all 3-bet hands like King Jack suited, Ace Jack suited, King Queen suited, maybe Queen Jack suited, all those hands that have us dominated, or jacks or tens. So here I rather want to 3-bet a hand like ace deuce, ace 3, ace 4 suited, where I'm not dominated by his suited broadways. So here you can see the concept behind, and this is something you can do by yourself. In order to determine squeezing ranges, you look at the most likely flatting ranges. So in case you get flat called, and then you just take the equilab and you, for example, you take those potential hands you want to squeeze with, and then you compare the equities. So let's make an example here. So we assume either the initial raiser or the flat caller is continuing with that range against our re-raise. And let's take a hand like 10-9 suited and see how it performs. So assuming we're in the small range and we want to construct a squeezing range in that very situation. So let's see, okay, wow, this is pretty bad equity, right? 36%, and I see a lot of people squeezing those hands. Or let's take Jack 10 suited, 39%. It's a little better, but still not that what I am looking for. Let's take a hand like Ace 5 suited. We see now 2% more, and now we're talking. This is definitely considerable, because also you should not only look at the raw equity, you also want to think about, okay, what can happen? I mean, with Jack 10 suited, 10-9 suited, we're gonna be dominated so often, or that means our realization factor is pretty low, because unless we're not hitting a straight or hitting a flush right away, we're gonna play with second pairs, weak top pairs, and we always have to pot control. And that means we're gonna realize our equity less. With the Ace 5 suited, the thing is, first of all, there are not so many ace X our opponent is playing against us. We are blocking an ace, so he has already less combos of ace X. There are only 4 hands, but we are ahead against all of the broadways, and it's not so likely that we will be dominated. And his range is pretty defined. It's very Broadway heavy. So on a Jack 10x board, we're not gonna see bet. But if it's a low board, and especially in low boards, we also have an additional gut shot. If the board is something like deuce 4 8 or 8 7 3, 8 7s, even those middle kind of boards, 8 7 3, 9 6 5, we can just see bet right away, because he has all those broadways. He has to, better ace highs, he has to let go. And that's pretty good with a hand like Ace 5 suited here. I mean, the thing is, Queen Jack suited might have also a lot of equity, even 43%, but the thing is, this is already strong enough to flat call 3-way also from the small blind. Yet I wouldn't mind a squeeze play here. Here, because this speaks again, this point, squeeze those hands that are weak to call, and Queen Jack suited is strong enough to call. I mean, Ace 5 suited, those hands we can play from the small blind against an under the gun range and the flat call that are strong enough to squeeze. They are also potentially good enough to flat call. Yet, especially when you play higher stakes, you want to have a bluffing range there. If your 3-bet percentage is very low, and you're not squeezing often enough, you're not getting paid out with your better hands. And also you increase DV with those hands because you're playing aggressively. You're gonna take down the pot pre-flop more often. So here you definitely want to have some hands you want to bluff with, and with those low suited aces, they're pretty good to do it with. You can mix it up. If there's a fish involved, I would just flat call. So here again, in-game table selection, super important. Squeeze lighter with stack sizes where you put their tournament life at risk, where they cannot 4-bet bluff. They can hardly call your squeeze with many hands. Remember, a squeeze should always be on the bigger size, since there's one flat caller involved. So their only decision is all in or forward most of the time. Those spots are also pretty good to go a little bit, to bluff a bit more. Sizing here, if you go 3 times the initial raise, you should always put 1 big blind on top. Equity beats blocker effects. Guys, blocker effects are not that important. It's more about the equity you have when get called. Yes, they have little effects and they can make the difference when the decision is really, really close. but your focus should be on equity. And if you construct your range and you distinguish between flat calling and 3-betting range or squeezing range, and you have a very well designed range, and ranges I will give you later, then you don't need to take those hands like offsuited crap hands or suited king x hands. No, they're just shit. You don't want to squeeze or 3-bet those kind of hands.